Hi, I'm Maryann Davis from the Transitions Research and Training Center. I'm going to be talking today about research-based employment supports for youth with chronic mental health conditions and disabilities. This webcast series represents a collaboration between VCU CTI and UMass Medical School's Transitions RTC. The presentation has largely been developed under grants from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, and from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. However, the views and work presented here does not necessarily represent the view of our federal funders. So I'm the director of the Transitions Research and Training Center, better known as the Transitions RTC. Within our Transitions RTC, we have the Learning and Working during the Transition to Adulthood Rehabilitation Research and Training Center. And we are at the University of Massachusetts Medical School in the Department of Psychiatry. We are part of the Systems and Psychosocial Advances Research Center, better known as SPARC. And you can find all of our products and activities at the website listed at the bottom of this slide. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mean by serious mental health conditions. There are a variety of terms that we often hear. In our title, we used chronic mental health disabilities or psychiatric disability. Serious emotional disturbance is typically used for individuals under age 18, or serious mental illness for many adults over the age of 18. And serious mental health conditions is intended for use across all of these different types of labels for individuals who have a mental health condition that causes significant functional impact on various domains, including family, social, peer, school, work, community functioning, or activities of daily living. Examples of mental health diagnoses include major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder, generalized anxiety disorders. These could be eating disorders or disruptive impulse control and conduct disorders. All of those are considered mental health diagnoses. What are not considered mental health diagnoses that would fit under the umbrella of serious mental health conditions are neurodevelopmental disorders such as intellectual disabilities, autism spectrum disorders, or learning disabilities or learning disorders. Neurocognitive disorders also would not be a mental health disorder, traumatic brain injury or delirium. Also, substance use disorders are not considered mental health disorders. Each of these other kinds of conditions can co-occur with a mental health condition, and it would still be considered to be a serious mental health condition as long as the mental health condition is the primary diagnosis that is causing the functional impairment. So that is the population that we'll be talking about today. Generally, we're talking about ages 14 to 30, with a real strong focus between 16 and 25 for that transition from being primarily a student to when people have primarily launched their adult work lives. I'm going to talk a bit, I'm going to use the term career development, and in the employment field, sometimes that can be a term that people have reactions to. There has been historically a fair amount of work done to try to move the field in previous eras from focusing too much on preparing people for work, particularly adults with psychiatric disabilities, exploring their career interests, helping them develop skills for work, and not sufficient emphasis on actually helping them to become employed and stay employed. And so for us, though, we're defining career development in a different way because it really is what is commonly occurring during this stage of life intensely from 16 to 25, where the initial stages of career development, where people are trying to figure out what it is that they are interested in and what skills they have and what experiences they need, are important to essentially shaping their future work lives. So we're talking about career development as being meaningful employment. Meaningful employment is a basic feature of a satisfying existence for most members of our society, and we think that young people with a serious mental health condition are very desirous of having meaningful employment as well. And by meaningful employment, we mean sustained periods of employment in one or a series of related positions, that has progressive development of knowledge, skills, and useful expertise, or an individual progresses in their development of knowledge, skills, and useful expertise, and that there is involved in increasing remuneration consistent with that of their growing expertise. So career development does not mean a professional career necessarily, although it could include that, but any kind of sustained employment where there is increasing expertise and increasing income that comes from that over a period of time. And it's what I think we all want for young people to have in their adult lives, are not just a series of short-term jobs that don't really provide something that they feel good about, as well as a good income, but something that is more sustained and it becomes a meaningful part of their lives. I will also say that we have a very full treatment of our theory of career development that is posted at the website you can see at the bottom of your slide. I'm going to go over that very briefly. Our theoretical framework, which incorporates theory from social cognitive career theory, social capital theory, and cultural capital theory as well. And while I won't go into the details of this cyclic model that you see here, you can see that the major components that we think are important to attend to in helping young people develop more successful careers is that it includes important elements of, in the middle there, of their vocational cognitions and emotions, such as vocational self-efficacy or outcome expectations, or the stress that they experience while being engaged in vocational activities. Another set of important components are the vocational settings in which they have their experiences, so various circumstances that those are maybe how they experience stigma there, or whether they have efficacy relevant supports or obstacles there in their place of work. And also their personal resources, such as how is their mental health at the time, what social capital, the family resources or people that you know do they bring to their work lives. So those various personal resources also contribute. And those three factors then have an impact on an individual's vocational performance and attainment. But that's not a static thing. So one's professional performance and attainment then feeds back onto, becomes then your past vocational experiences over time, which can then be shaped by these three major aspects of vocational life. So this is the theoretical framework that we at the Transitions RTC, and specifically in our Learning and Working During the Transition to Adulthood Rehabilitation Research and Training Center, focus our research around. There's literature to suggest that there are unique aspects of career development that occur for most young people during young adulthood. By the mid-20s, there are significant career differences between those who pursue college degrees and those who don't, and those who start families and those who don't, that have significant impact on their lives going forward. By their mid-20s, most young adults are in long-term or career-consistent jobs. That is not so true prior to the mid-20s. There are important cognitive aspects of career development that crystallize during young adulthood, and that crystallization then is more difficult to change afterward. That would be consistent with our notion of what is a critical developmental period in which certain things occur that are difficult to have occur at different stages of development. We also know that having insufficient career activities like career exploration can interfere with adult career roles, and a lot of those career activities occur by the mid-20s, and career efforts during young adulthood do predict later career success. So in many ways, this period of 16 to 25 is a very critical window for trying to establish strong launching points for adult careers, adult working lives that are meaningful. The Institute of Medicine recently completed a study of young adulthood. It was a very comprehensive study, and their findings and recommendations can be found in a report at this website that you see at the top of your slide. One of the key findings that are important for our discussion of employment for young adults with serious mental health conditions is recognizing the way that the world has changed, that places greater demands on young adults now than it did before. There has been a marked change in our economic structure and advances in communication and information technologies in the labor market that have occurred over the past 20 years prior to the Great Recession that have really altered the landscape of risk and opportunity during young adulthood for careers and for other adult activities. And largely as a result of those changes that became magnified during the Great Recession, young adulthood is a time where the inequality can be magnified between those who have more and those who have less income over time. We know that about 17% of all 16 to 24-year-olds are neither in school nor are they working. And we also know that the earnings gap between those who have a 4-year college degree and those who only have a high school diploma has roughly doubled since 1980. And that earnings gap magnifies over the course of the lifetime. And so we can recognize that it's important to get as far as possible in supporting young people in their education to certainly complete high school, but to help them move beyond high school to post-secondary education and training, and hopefully to completing a bachelor's degree, which will give them opportunities for employment and meaningful employment in fields that will help them to be financially self-supporting. So as I said, the earnings prospects of all young people without any post-secondary education or training credential, and especially for high school dropouts, are now very limited. This was, as you can see from the dates of these citations, prior to the Great Recession. During the Great Recession, between 2007 and 2009, there were additional obstacles posed for young adults, and this essentially our slow recovery has really had a marked impact on youth entry into the labor force, which is of national concern. That delayed entry into the labor force for youth can have long-term impact on their employment earnings across the lifetime. And that concern is greatest for disadvantaged or vulnerable young people. And certainly young people who have a serious mental health condition fall into that category. So what do we know specifically about the employment for youth with serious mental health conditions? It appears to be low. It's surprising how few studies really directly have evidence about how this population is doing once they are into the young adult years of employment. There are a few. There is a study by Waghorn and his colleagues that young adults with anxiety or depression are less employed than mature adults with anxiety and depression, so that this difference between being younger and older in employment is seen within those who have a mental health condition. We also know that young adults that have a psychiatric disability and adolescents have lower employment rates compared to their same age peers in other disability groups or in the general population. That is essentially the primary finding about employment for individuals who have a serious mental health condition, but those are among those who have had a serious mental health condition as an adolescent. We know much less about young adults who currently have a serious mental health condition, whether or not they had it during adolescence, and how they are doing in employment. We don't have any studies of age differences in employment or generally in employment in young adults who are in our adult systems, such as adult mental health. However, from the other studies, we would conclude that we suspect and feel strongly that they have challenges to employment. And that it's important for us to have research findings that look at who has struggles with employment within this population, who does better or who does worse, what are malleable factors that we might be able to have an impact on with our interventions to help them have more success, and ultimately to have research on what are interventions that are effective in helping young people have as important a career, as successful a career as they possibly can. So really the state of the research that we have The answer to these questions remains in its infancy, although there is more now than when I first started in this field 20 years ago, which is good news. But we also know that we need much more research to be able to understand really well what is it that we can do to help them succeed as much as possible in their work lives. The state of the science as of the fall of 2013 is, we summarized prior to a conference that our Learning and Working During the Transition to Adulthood Rehabilitation Research and Training Center held. And you can find the summary of those state of the science papers at this website at the bottom of your slide. And this is the publication that summarizes both the state of the science on education and employment. And much of the presentation today is based on those findings and any updates since the fall of 2013. So there are a variety of established employment interventions that young adults with serious mental health conditions would encounter as they enter into their work lives. There are vocational rehabilitation services offered by state vocational rehabilitation agencies. There is one broad set of guidelines called Guideposts for Success that were developed for use for youth with disabilities, so not specific to serious mental health conditions, but for youth with disabilities. There are clubhouses, that is the ICCD, the International Clubhouse Center, certified clubhouses that are available in many states throughout our country and actually internationally as well. There are a variety of career development interventions that people may encounter that are focused more on some of the elements that should contribute to stronger employment. And then there is supported employment that is focused on the individualized placement support model for adults with psychiatric disabilities. These are probably the most common employment interventions, with the Guideposts for Success probably being more limited in its availability to people, although it was the focus of a Social Security Administration demonstration grant several years ago, and is prominent in the Promise grants that is a more current Social Security Administration and large federal program partnership grant program that's going on now. So one of the important things to understand is that really for all of these interventions, we've seen very little evidence of the impact that they would have on careers. And by that, I mean looking at sustained employment over time. That most of the research that examines the impact of various employment interventions will look at the percentage of individuals employed over a period of time, or the average numbers of weeks that an individual was employed in a one-year period, and whether it was part-time or full-time. But generally, we don't really look over, say, a 5 to 10-year period to see how well an individual's work life is progressing with or without these different types of interventions. And so that notion of really a sustained period of employment in adulthood, we don't have very good information about what is going to be helpful to help young people develop a sustained adult work life. To date, for individuals who have a serious mental health condition, the IPS model, that individualized individual placement and support model, has the strongest research findings. It is a well-established evidence-based practice. There are consistently better employment outcomes for adults compared to several other interventions, including VR services, clubhouse services, the assertive community treatment program, in past randomized controlled trials. And so the IPS model at this point has the strongest evidence for efficacy for employment. However, even with that strong model, the majority of individuals are working in part-time jobs with generally low wages, and many of them are unemployed at any given period of time. And so the IPS model, while it is consistently the strongest model we have, also is a model that for which there is certainly room for improvement. The analyses of young adults from the clinical trials of IPS suggest that it also produces better outcomes in young adults than usual services do. And so it is one of the few adult interventions for which we have specific evidence of its efficacy in young adults. However, yet again, we see that it has not achieved more than a low-wage, mostly part-time work for those who are in the program. We see very limited research on programs that are specifically for young adults. Right now, there are no clinical trials research focused on young adults in VR services or in clubhouses. As I said, the strongest research findings for young adults to date is the IPS model. Guideposts, while it was the focus of a demonstration grant that the Social Security Administration implemented several years ago now, that did include a random assignment evaluation, is a very broad set of guidelines. There is not really a strong fidelity measure because it's not very specific in the way that we typically think of for evidence-based models. There do appear to be, for several states in that demonstration, better outcomes than usual services for youth with disabilities. However, its specific findings for youth with psychiatric disabilities is largely unknown at this point. One of the grant sites that was involved in that demonstration grant program specifically focused on young people with psychiatric disabilities, but it was a site in which there was no significant difference between those in the Guideposts intervention and those in the usual services. It's not clear why there were not significant findings in that particular site. So the evidence for Guideposts for this particular population at this point is not there, although certainly deserving of more research focus. Okay. Given that IPS has the strongest research findings at this point, it's worth reviewing a bit about the details of what is involved in an IPS program and their approach. Essentially, it's a systematic approach based on 8 supported employment principles. And for people who are familiar with supported employment, many of these will be very familiar. There are some that were specifically developed for adults with psychiatric disabilities that may be a little bit different from standard supported employment practices. So there's a very strong focus on competitive employment as opposed to employment in a shelter or workshop, and employment side by side in settings with other employees who have also applied for competitively to achieve their jobs. IPS is open to any person with a psychiatric disability who wants to work. It is one of the ways in which IPS may be a little different in the way that it works for young adults. Some young adults, when they have possible access to IPS programs, may not be sure if working is what they want to do at this point, if they would rather attend school. And so for standard IPS programs, it is most appropriate for young adults who have a current goal to work. That is something that they know that they want to do. Supported employment in general, and IPS in particular, uses a rapid job search approach. The job search occurs within 1 month of entering the program, but is according to the client's preference. So there's not a long period of time spent exploring and developing skills. The idea is to quickly get somebody into a job and then provide them the supports and skills that they need to keep that job successful. There's a very strong component of integrating it closely with the mental health treatment team. IPS programs are often provided through community mental health centers, and the employment specialists sit in on team meetings in which one of their clients' clinical progress or clinical status is being discussed, so they can be sure that they're well coordinated with the clinical care. Potential jobs are chosen based on people's preferences, and services are provided for an unlimited time. This is one of the things that makes providing IPS challenging, because it is not intended that you come in, you get it for a year and you're done. The idea is that you come in, you receive the supports as long as you need them, with the recognition that in serious mental health conditions, there's often a waxing and waning of both the illness and people's needs, but there may be another intensive time in a person's life within some period of time after they've had success that they may need support again, and IPS should be open to them at that point. Supports are highly individualized, and it's important that benefits counseling is provided to help address Social Security disincentives effect. There's been research on the IPS approach that have found that one of the greatest disincentives to individuals seeking higher wages or longer hours is the fear of losing their benefits that keeps them from taking risks that they may not be successful and then have difficulty getting their benefits returned. Now, in part because of its success, IPS has become the focus of adaptations for other populations, and there are several that are relevant for young adults. Two versions have been adapted for young adults in the early stages of psychosis that have growing support for their efficacy for employment in particular. Combining supported employment with supported education is the primary adaptation to IPS for young adults, so that if a person is wanting to work but also go to school at the same time, that they can be supported in both of those goals. Keith Nuchterlein and his colleagues at UCLA added a curriculum on working, some additional information about substance use and how it may impact employment or education, and has added a family education component to his adaptation of IPS. And there is a systematic review that Bond, Drake, and Luciano completed in 2014 that summarizes the findings that indicate that it has been effective, certainly with employment outcomes. The findings from the Nuchterlein randomized controlled trial should be presented in 2000, and actually in this fall, with the initial description of the program having been published in 2008. And as I said, standard IPS with young adults in randomized controlled trials did find that it was more successful than usual services, with 82% of young adults in IPS having some employment versus 42% in control groups. And so that is the essence of the strong support for standard IPS, not the adapted IPS, for being helpful to young adults. There are some adaptations currently being undertaken in our research and training center. We recently completed an open trial that was, Marcia Ellison was the principal investigator for this open trial, using supported education and supported employment for young adults with psychiatric disabilities, not those who were in early stages of psychosis. Peer mentors were added to the model. This was implemented at Thresholds in Chicago with a group of young people who were receiving very intensive mental health services at the time, and most of whom had been young people who had been served in foster care. That open trial, in which we primarily were examining the feasibility of the model and establishing what would a peer mentor look like attached to an IPS team, had encouraging findings, with 42% of the young people having either a school or employment start, but further research is needed to establish its relative efficacy in some sort of a more rigorous randomized controlled trial. There is an adaptation of IPS for homeless young adults who don't necessarily have a psychiatric disorder that was developed by Ferguson and published in 2013 that housed the supported employment at a homeless service agency. And in her small randomized controlled trial of 36 individuals, she found a significant difference with those in the IPS condition, 85% of them having some employment versus 38% in the usual services having employment. So that is also an encouraging finding of the IPS approach being relevant for young people. So these are important movements with the IPS model to establish for whom it is effective in young adults, and also exploring ways that may improve its efficacy with young adults. So describing a little bit about the Guideposts for Success, it is a handbook that was developed by the National Collaborative on Workforce and Disability for Youth, published in 2005. It is a broad set of guidelines. There is no fidelity measure in the way that we would typically expect for a specific intervention, but in the evaluation for the implementation of guideposts in the Social Security Administration, there were some broad fidelity guidelines that were used to determine whether programs stayed within this framework or not. It is of interest for people who are interested in helping young people with psychiatric disabilities because it is very developmentally appropriate for any youth with a disability. The second guidepost in the series of guideposts focuses on career preparation and work-based learning experiences. And those learning experiences described in the guidepost should include the following. Opportunities to engage in a range of work-based exploration activities, like going and visiting a site or shadowing an individual with a job. That there should be multiple on-the-job training experiences that are paid or unpaid to help a young person develop their specific skills. Those could include community service that's specifically linked to the content of a program of study or school credit. That these are important for those early stages of developing critical work skills. That there should be opportunities to learn and practice their work skills. Often these are called soft skills of how you work with others in the workplace, how you sort of negotiate conflicts, how you even dress appropriate for the workplace and dress differently for different aspects of work, potentially. There's also the guideline that opportunities to learn firsthand about specific occupational skills related to a career pathway should be made available to young people. So providing opportunities where they can get out and practice, learn new skills that are part of what they identify as a career path that they are interested in. And again, with career paths being described more by occupations than necessarily what we might think of as sort of a upper class professional career necessarily. So the evidence for the efficacy of guideposts I alluded to a little bit earlier. The Social Security Administration launched the Youth Transition Demonstration in 2003 that had a random assignment evaluation designed. And it was each of the sites were implementing something within the guidepost guidelines, plus Social Security Administration waivers of disability program rules to help overcome some of that disincentive that some benefits can provide to people who are concerned about losing their benefits while not yet having strong enough capacities for strong employment to support their income. There were 6 sites that served 14 to 25-year-olds with disabilities with random assignments, and the programs provided, they found that the programs that provided more hours of employment services ended up having those employees who had more worked hours and higher wages. So one of the takeaway lessons from that is providing more hours of employment services is beneficial for young people. There was no overall effect of guideposts, but there were better outcomes for those in the guidepost conditions in half of the sites. And so understanding why this didn't occur across sites is important. And as I said, the Promise grant program, the federal program that's underway now, will probably help us understand that better in the future. The evidence around other established vocational models for standard VR services, for ICCD clubhouses, certified clubhouses, for assertive community treatment, to date have not shown specific evidence of efficacy for employment in young adults. And for each of these, IPS tested with adults had favorable findings against each of these other approaches. And so at this point, we might conclude that that's likely for young adults as well. That is not to dissuade us from examining these practices and seeing how we can make them the strongest we possibly can for young adults, and that the findings may actually be different in young adults. This is what research needs to establish in the future. Now, there are a plethora of career development approaches in the career development literatures. There are career counselors, that will help a wide variety of people develop their career skills. However, the research on career interventions truly has not been rigorous. It is hard to know what might be interventions that could be used effectively with young people with serious mental health conditions. Most of the specific interventions have had a single study that have not had what we might think of as a treatment manual or an intervention manual. There haven't been specific guidelines. There hasn't been a fidelity measure to ensure that what was offered was consistent with what was intended. And so most of the research has repeatedly for these career development interventions primarily not used sufficiently rigorous methods for us to have consistent support for their evidence that they are an effective way to build employment capacity and careers in young people with serious mental health conditions. Moreover, their direct impact on employment has really been examined. They've primarily looked at people's interest in applying for a job or their knowledge about their potential jobs that they might have in the future, but few of them have really looked at the actual employment impact of the career development intervention. So this is another area in which research and a more rigorous approach would be beneficial for us understanding just what they have to contribute to help young people with serious mental health conditions. So there are additional models that are under development that are that show some real promise for specifically for young people with serious mental health conditions. Project Renew, which was developed by Doug Cheney primarily and is currently being investigated by Joanne Malloy, which stands for Rehabilitation, Empowerment, Natural Supports, Education, and Work, has positive employment change from baseline in some of their early work, and is currently under investigation as a randomized control trial as an Institute for Educational Sciences grant, and hopefully that will be developing further evidence of its efficacy for employment. The Career Visions program is specifically it's a small clinical trial of career development that shows positive results for career preparedness. However, its relationship to employment is not yet established, but that also is encouraging, so that it deserves further research attention and an understanding of how it has an impact on employment. One of the interesting interventions that is out there is the Social Enterprise Intervention for Homeless Young Adults. This is the same investigator that looked at housing IPS within homeless shelters, and they had encouraging employment in hours in a small randomized control trial. I'll describe a little bit more about that model shortly. The IPS with peer mentors I described briefly before, that had some encouraging findings for being either engaged in school or work. And one of the findings from that study was that there were really strong relationships formed between the young people in the intervention and their peer mentors, which is worthy of more attention in the future, of seeing how that relationship might facilitate strong employment outcomes for young adults. We've also been investigating an adaptation of multisystemic therapy, which is an intervention that's largely been used to reduce delinquency in juveniles. But we have adapted it for using with emerging adults, 17 to 21-year-olds with a serious mental health condition who have recently been involved in the justice system. That adaptation involves coaches who help young people focus on their education and employment goals. And we had a small trial to see whether having coaches who really focused on their employment goals compared to having young people connected with vocational rehabilitation services seemed to be most beneficial for them. And we found that in that very small trial, that having the coaches embedded in the team and focusing on their employment goals seemed to have a positive impact on whether they were either in school or working post-treatment, with 73% of those in the coach condition versus those 31% in the VR services condition being in school or working post-treatment. Now, current research that is just getting underway that hopefully will maybe in the next 5 years be able to report to you. We have some positive findings from an adaptation of IPS for high school age students. We know that we want young people to complete their high school education, and so trying to encourage them when they want to work to be able to work during high school, but also support their goal of completing high school is very important. So we are currently working, Marcia Ellison is the principal investigator on this, is working with colleagues at Dartmouth University who developed the IPS model to adapt it for high school age youth, is just getting started. There is a current research project at the Pathways Rehabilitation Research and Training Center at Portland State University that is using their Achieve My Plan approach to inform young adult peer support workforce folks about how to help young people with serious mental health conditions increase their self-determination. So this is a workforce intervention piece of research to see if this can't be used to strengthen the peer workforce for young people working with other young people with serious mental health conditions. Most of these interventions really focus on employment and helping young people get jobs. There is some research to suggest that it's valuable to look at other types of employment experiences for young people, perhaps helping them have internships, either paid or unpaid internships to help consolidate work skills. But there's little research on those types of approaches specifically in this population. As I mentioned earlier, there's an interesting social enterprise intervention for homeless young adults that was published in 2012 and 2013, which is a very interesting 20-month model that has encouraging employment findings for both employment being achieved and hours in a small randomized controlled trial. That model includes vocational skill acquisition stage. That's a 4-month course with technical training and education for acquiring vocational skills, followed by a small business skill acquisition stage, which is another 4-month course that's focused on business-related skills to start social enterprises. This is followed by a 12-month phase of a social enterprise formation and distribution, in which young people in the program form a social enterprise and help establish it and establish its success. And during the course of this 20-month approach, there's a mental health component that is provided to support homeless youth who also have a mental health need, woven throughout all of the stages of this intervention. This is one of the more innovative approaches that we've seen implemented and that is under development to see its efficacy with young people who may have a serious mental health condition who are also homeless. So we think this is very much worth keeping an eye on. So some of the shared features of some of the models that are currently under development that have been focused more on the transition age youth or young adult population is that they really do emphasize some aspect of career exploration, assessment, and planning that may occur while supporting their current employment, so that a young person may also be getting support for their employment and have a job while concurrently exploring what it is that they're interested in, what they have skills for, what they may want to do in the future. One of the key components of almost any of these developing interventions for young people or ones that are becoming more established is that they concurrently support both employment and education. And as I was reviewing at the beginning, because it is so important for young people to take their educational attainment as far as possible, in our, not just our current, the Great Recession and beyond, but in the way that our economy is likely to continue in the U.S. going forward, and supporting young people in their goals for further education is very important, and it's age typical. And so employment supports for young people that concurrently support them also achieving further education are very important. These interventions also support young adults to essentially learn how to explore their career desires and goals in an ongoing fashion, so that perhaps when they are done with a particular program at a period of in time, that they have developed the skills and capacities to continue to establish their working goals, think about what it is that they need to achieve. If they set a higher goal for themselves, is it education? Is it experience? How do they get it? Those kinds of skills that we typically use across our adult lives, that many of these programs are trying to help young people develop those skills at an early stage. Then the other thing that distinguishes many of these supports is that they also recognize how important families are for young people during young adulthood and their early work lives, and often find ways to help young people think about and bring their families in as resources for them as they try to establish their young adult work lives. And finally, I wanted to end on a research note that in that State of the Science conference that we held in the fall of 2013, we invited stakeholders from many federal programs that shape both the dollars that are available for programs that can support this population and their employment goals, as well as what are the kinds of grant programs that are available. We included in that conference young people, young adults, family members, other researchers, a variety of policymakers, and we asked the people who attended that conference who had read our summary, and we provided for them live, in case they hadn't read it in advance, that summary of the State of the Science, what they thought the research agenda should be going forward. And the one that was most endorsed was to continue research that developed models to test their career development efficacy. And again, with the career development meaning their capacity to provide young people the opportunity for meaningful employment, sustained employment over time that brings increasing expertise and increasing remuneration over time, and to establish the efficacy for improving current employment and developing careers over time. And so we have felt encouraged that we and others that have the capacity to conduct research, and our partners who can provide interventions, will continue in this road to try to find what are the most effective ways to help young people with serious mental health conditions launch the most successful adult work lives possible. Thank you.